We were traveling for the bicentennial in 1976 to Washington, D.C. with our two young sons. And as we walked along the mall, we came close to the Smithsonian Original Castle, the Dark Castle building. And right across from there was a carousel and a band organ playing. And with two little boys, you could not walk past that. So we walked up to that carousel, and there was this large sign that said, "This carousel was made in North Tonawanda, New York, and it is a national treasure." And so was the band organ made in North Tonawanda. And that really made us feel good, how many communities have something from their city right there in plain view in Washington. So we came home and said, gee, too bad we don't have a carousel in our city. Never did have. Perhaps 3,000 carousels and many other rides went out of the city, and we kind of just put that in the back of our mind. And about 2 years later, there was an article in the newspaper by the director of the Carnegie Art Center who had found this building, and I believe he wanted to use some of it as a theater, but he asked if there was anyone out there in the community who wanted to help bring a carousel back to North Tonawanda. And that was the start of it. Alan Herschel immigrated from Scotland. When he established a foundry in North Tonawanda, that's what his family had been doing in Scotland for generations. It was a foundry to make cast iron equipment, mostly heavy-duty farm equipment or the grates in the streets. The big heavy farm equipment was powered by a steam boiler.
They were taking advantage of the raw materials in the labor force here at the time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, making steam engines, making amusement devices. You know, the story is that Alan Herschel saw a merry-go-round in New York City on a visit.
It was being operated by a steam engine that was running pulleys across to make the carousel go around. He thought, I make steam engines, and I live in North Tonawanda, which at the time was one of the largest lumber ports, so there's lots of wood.
Came back, convinced his partner to try some of these amusement devices.
And they started making what was then called like a steam riding gallery, where the horses weren't on poles and didn't go up and down, they just kind of swayed back and forth.
They were called riding galleries because you were supposed to sit very proper on the horse and admire the artwork in the center. And in fact, that was the advice, to not get dizzy, is to study the artwork in the center gallery. Steam-powered riding galleries evolved, and they put some animation into the animals, where they would rock or they would jump, and eventually most merry-go-rounds today have all jumpers in them.
But then his partner Ed Spillman, who was the true engineer, wanted to go into automobile manufacturing. Herschel didn't want to do that. He wanted to stick with just amusement rides.
And the Herschel-Spillman Company really broke off into two branches. The Herschel-Spillman Motor Company, and the other part was the ride division. They decided to call it Spillman Engineering. He actually retired from the business in 1911, and in 1915 he was bored and came back as a competitor to Spillman Engineering.
And he came back with the concept of producing the traveling carousel that could go from community to community. I like to think of the carousels produced in this building as every person's carousel, because instead of having to pack your family into a vehicle and travel to the big city to ride, it came to you.
They did break it down to a production line type of process. So each carver was not carving an entire animal. You had apprentices carving legs, a journeyman, the little more advanced carver, would carve bodies, and the master or head carver would carve heads and necks and put all the parts together. Using that process, average about 1.5 horses per man per day. So for a 36 animal machine, it really would not take them that long to produce all the animals.
The company grew quickly. This company specialized in road machines, not the ones, not the Philadelphia Toboggan Company that would sit in a park for all of its life. This company specialized in the road machine. It traveled, it had a special purpose, and the design was conducive to throwing it in a truck once a week and pulling it out of the truck and putting it up and making sure that the maintenance wasn't too high.
So he had the vision to know that this would become a popular machine, between the Herschel companies and then the Wurlitzer company that was making the band organs for these carousels, they were the largest employers in the community.
Those shelves behind me have approximately 2,000 of those handmade stencils. Some of them are now 100 years old. They came from Wurlitzer when Wurlitzer discontinued the band organ operation in 1945. But then that operation came here to Alan Herschel. Alan Herschel and a couple of subsequent owners of this machinery have made their stencils. So we have Wurlitzer stencils, we have Alan Herschel stencils, we have TRT Manufacturing stencils, and we have Doyle Lane player piano stencils. But the great majority of them are Wurlitzer. The sound of a real band organ is inimitable, and it is recognized everywhere, even to present generations.
In the late 30s, especially through the 40s and 50s, the company expanded its operation to create rides, child-size rides, called kiddie rides.
And children-sized versions of the merry-go-round came out, and they sold them individually. Eventually, they marketed it as a package.
They actually made a book. It was like an instruction manual for how to have an amusement park. And you could buy like a whole kit from the Herschel companies on where to place your rides, how to put the train around it, what rides you should have.
I think they found that it not only kept business going when there wasn't as much demand maybe for some of the adult rides, but it was a time in America as it was growing, it evolved where now malls and things started to develop.
And that was during like the baby boom, when all these people are back from the war, all these people have kids, and now you have all these kids that were born in the 50s going on these rides, and it was huge, huge, huge money makers.
Rides that we all rode on as a child, the boat in the tub of water, the helicopter where you pushed and pulled on the bar to make yourself go up and down.
So by probably 10 years into the production of those rides, there already were 500 to 700 kiddie lands.
There are still 74 kiddie lands across the country. So a lot of Herschel machines still in operation. The company was sold a couple of times over the years, and eventually Chance Manufacturing bought the rights to the company and took it out of town, and we lost it out of Buffalo in Western New York and North Tonawanda. Eventually the rights to the Alan Herschel Company Limited were purchased back from Chance Manufacturing, and that still exists today in North Tonawanda, making parts for the existing machines, for the Kiddie Land machines and for the carousels.
I was teaching 5th graders in the city, and it didn't take me long to understand that these young people had no real connection to their city. They had nothing that they thought they were proud of because I would ask them. They knew very little about the history of their city, and that always bothered me because I grew up here, I love the city, I wanted to see it prosper, and yet here was the whole next generation that didn't have the same attachment.
I was teaching a wood carving class at the local arts center, and as I came up from the basement to go home that evening, the gentleman running the building that night said, you should stay for 10 minutes or so to listen to this meeting tonight. It's about this place in town that used to make wooden horses. So I didn't know anything about that. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So I went the whole meeting, and it was the first organizational night of the Carousel Society of the Niagara Frontier.
My great-grandfather, Wallace Oliver, he started with Armitage Herschel, eventually went to Herschel Spillman, and worked there for several years. When his son was old enough, my grandfather, in 1901, he started working with the company as well. In 1915, my grandfather, Ward, came over to Alan Herschel Company as the head of the carving shop. And in 1983, my mother sent me over to a member meeting to find out what was going on. The new members were supposed to stand up and give their name and tell about their family, right? So I just stood up, I said, Ward Bray, and I sat down. And Ray Profak said, stand up and tell them who your grandfather was. And I said, Ward Oliver. And the whole crowd went, and it was like, you know my grandfather? It became a learning adventure for family history, and cooking became a passion for my family. Early on in the early years, we spent a lot of time here helping with the basics. This place was a mess when we first got it.
35 years ago when you stood in it, if you sneezed too hard, the thing would start to collapse. So we've completely restored the building itself and stabilized it. We were on a railroad siding originally, so every time someone would walk by, there had been a fence up to keep people away from the building as an industry. And whether they were drinking soda or whiskey or whatever it was, all those bottles came flying over the fence. So for 3 months we were digging, trying to clean up that debris inside the fence area, and all of a sudden we found a blacktop path underneath.
I owned a band organ. The museum did not. And they were having a special grand opening way back in the last century. And somehow they found me and asked if they could use my band organ for that day. And they did, and then they kept it another couple of years.
My mom and my grandma used to bring my brother and I here to the museum back in 1983-ish when it first opened, and we would come and ride it, and it was a lot of fun. I remember spinning in the love tub and riding the horses, and back then they were purple and gold and silver, and they didn't look anything like they do today. So it's really nice to come back and see all the work that's been done.
The original part of the carousel was an early, probably 1905, Herschel Spillman steam riding gallery, on which the horses did not go up and down, they just rocked. It was in a park in London, Ontario, Canada, called Springbank Park. The owner, Mr. Joyce, had bought it from North Tonawanda, took it to his park, and operated it there for about 10 years. But by that time, other companies and the Herschel Spillman Company were making carousels with overhead cams so that the horses could go up and down. He returned to North Tonawanda, and instead of going back to Herschel Spillman, that was the year that Alan Herschel opened this building, and he bought this bigger machine called a No. 1 Special. He already owned 24 horses, so they drilled holes in those horses, mounted them on the middle and inside row, and he bought one row of the brand new 1915 Alan Herschel horses. So for us, it's the perfect carousel to have in the museum. It represents both companies, both styles, both time periods, and yet these horses always rode together. And we always knew, even though we were originally the Carousel Museum, we always knew about the second half of the history of the company, and that hopefully someday we'd be able to interpret that.
Katy Land Testing Park evolved because we really wanted to show off Herschel's small rides, and you would have to have an outside separate area really to do that. Even though we have a pretty massive building, we've filled it up fairly fast over the years.
We have had several people come into the museum and tell us that as they were children in the neighborhood, when the company had a carousel or a ride that needed to be tested,
they would either ring a bell or play a band organ for the neighborhood children to come onto the ride to really be the test dummies. And when that wasn't always available, then they would have bags of sand would go on for weight on the machine to test it.
So we thought that that would be a perfect opportunity to ask children what they thought about these rides in this new exhibit, and to give it the idea that it's more than just an amusement park. Three of the rides were always at a restaurant in Niagara Falls called Page's Whistle Pig Restaurant. They had purchased the rides from the company. If you purchased dinner, you would get free ride tickets to go out and ride. So we had always told Mr. Page, if you ever retire, we'd love to have those rides back. And that's what he did. He never forgot that. And the fourth ride was donated to us by a visitor who had come to the museum from North Carolina. And about a year later, he called us and said, I have this car and fire truck ride. I'd like to donate it to you, which of course we were excited to receive. And he brought it up here on a trailer, gave us the trailer, the rides, and everything else. And he was ecstatic when we opened the exhibit.
What's very unique about this museum is that it's in the original factory building that made carousels. A lot of other museums are just in a regular old, steel structure, whatever kind of building, but they actually made carousels in this building. And I think that makes it one of the most special carousel museums in the world.
The Alan Herschel Company was known for its traveling machines, often called a country fair style because they would travel from fair to fair to be operated.
They were nickel machines. You pull up into a town, you set it up, form a line, you set out your band organ to attract people from all over. You make money for the day or the weekend, or you join another carnival, and then you hit the road again. These machines were never in one place.
The carvers were very skilled, but generally the horses were quite plain because of that traveling. It wouldn't pay to have a customer order fancy flowers or some other figure carved on an animal, and then when they put the animal into the truck to go, or the train car to go to the next fair, and they hit a bump or something and smash it, there'd be multi-hours of carving smashed in 2 seconds.
They tucked the ears back to make it look like the horse was running, when really it was to keep the kids from pulling the ears off or breaking off when you throw the horse into the truck. The legs were tucked up, looking like they're running, and then the Western style horse was a trademark of Alan Herschel. It's form and function together. You don't want the legs breaking off. That's maintenance, that's cost, right? That's downtime.
But if they got an order for a park machine that was going to sit there, they could carve as fancy as any of the other companies also.
You just see the time and energy and hard work that went into creating that particular pony, and they made so many of them. I think people's blood, sweat, and tears went into creating these. And I know that goes into restoring them as well. They get stripped down to nothing, re-glued, re-primered, and painted, and that's still a talent.
I am Ray Profrock, the museum director and a founding trustee. We're really pleased to see a large group of people here for our celebration of 100 years of operation of the Alan Herschel Company.
See how heavy that is? Traffic here. They're all done in sections. Okay, so you got the legs, you got the head, the tail is here somewhere, I don't know where it is right now. And what we do, we glue up the boards, leaving this hollow, and that's for warpage and being able to lift it. Once we get that, we can put them back together. We can trace our pattern on here, and then we begin the carving. Once it's all, like mine is getting close to being put together, I'll use the dowels and glue. I still have a little more fine tuning over here to do, but that's basically what you do. You put them all together with that and then paint.
We're restoring the animals from our carousel right now. We've got 36 animals on the carousel. We have 32 that have been restored. We had a benefactor who passed away. We got information that he had a carousel horse that would be donated to us in his will. What we found was that when I started working on it, was in many cases covered thoroughly with auto body filler. When I started scraping that off, what we realized was that one whole side of it was charred. There had been a fire on its left side. First, the face on the far side was charred heavily. We actually had to remove a whole section of it and then rebuild it. We did that. There was some damage to the mane. There was a lot of damage to these parts, like around the edges here of the saddle and around the blanket and this kind of thing, and in here, and then across the bottom of the blanket here. What actually was done by the people who were trying to repair it is that they scraped away as much of the charred wood as they could along the bottom here on the far side again. And they drove nails up into the wood here, and then it put Bondo, auto body filler. That's not as obvious, on that side as far as some of the trappings are concerned because that's a very plain side. The side toward the operator was just a very plain section. The right side of a carousel in the U.S. is known as the romance side. It's the side that's designed to attract people to ride that carousel. So that's the fancier side. It's carved more. That was a very, very challenging horse. That's probably the most challenging and the most satisfying in the end. And the horse came out to be beautiful, and it pointed out 10 horses to you and said, one of those horses is that horse you probably wouldn't recognize, you wouldn't be able to tell.
Christmas, we offer lunch with Santa, and he speaks with every single child. It's amazing. He leads the parade into the big carousel and rides all afternoon with the children.
1, 2, 3.
One of the Saturdays with Santa, the main hub on the carousel broke. It's the main piece that all of the arms of the carousel go into, and all of the cranks that make the horses go up and down ride on that, and it cracked. And we had a wonderful company come in and did a really great repair, which I think would have lasted quite a while. But we just started to think this is not a good idea, we better replace it. Therefore, the entire carousel had to come down because it's the first part that goes on the center pole, and obviously the last part to get off. We raised over $40,000 with GiveGab. It's an online fundraising. Not all of it came through that site, but quite a lot did, at least half. So it was individuals who gave anywhere from $5 to $3,000. And it was amazing. We had not only the fact that people supported the fundraising, but the notes and letters that we received about how important the carousel was to them. Many of them had been children, and now they bring their children. And the notes were amazing for us. But everything has a silver lining, because while it was down and we had all new steel parts made, every part was inspected, every part was cleaned and repainted, so it looks brand new again. Now we're back up and running, and hopefully it'll be here another 100 years. Originally, the building we're sitting in, which is now our education center for the museum, was the office for the Alan Herschel Company. Mr. Herschel bought the building in October of 1915. And originally it was just this end. It was a gable little cottage. And in the 20s, they extended the building into the longer, bigger size. And after many years, we were able to find the grants to restore the entire building. And we're very happy because now we have a beautiful classroom, we have offices for our educator. We've been able to do an exhibit of Herschel's office in this room. And since June, we've had over 1,000 students in here come with their class. We've been offering STEM lessons, especially simple machines and gears, because there's so many examples of that throughout the museum. We have still more to go, though, because there's always another project.
We're always learning. We're getting donations, we're getting testimony from people who were here. We're meeting people that used to work here, and it's fascinating and wonderful that we can continue to improve the story.
You kind of get carousel fever after you've been here for a little while, and there's no antidote for it. Especially when you watch families having such a good time together, and adults and seniors bringing back memories and feeling so good about it that we just keep going.